Well, good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing, Chris?
I'm tired, but
Yeah.
I'm good.
That's great. Well, yeah, thank you. So my name is Jason Williams, Executive Director of Centric, and Chris Denson with Innovation Crush Studios. So this is the morning after the Day of Innovation Conference that was just held in Indianapolis. So we welcomed over 300 innovators, leaders, thought leaders to the campus of Butler University.
And somehow me.
Yeah, and somehow Chris. We found this guy in the street. We needed a speaker. We brought him in. But obviously a great chance to sit down the next day. The dust is starting to settle and wanting to hear a little bit more from Chris. So I guess first of all, just, introduce yourself, quick bio, Crush Studios. What are you working on now? Yeah.
I'm Chris Denson. My through line, I guess, is innovation, which is a weird word to say. Like, that's what I do, because most people want to categorize it in some way, shape, or form. But I spend half my time hosting an interview series called Innovation Crush. We have 750,000 subscribers around the world, 200 plus episodes, a lot of thought leaders and innovators in their own right. And when I have to define that word, it's just really who's reimagining their industry, their practice, or inventing, from scratch, and examining that human journey that they've been on. The other 50% of my time is really spent as a practitioner. So working with brands and startups and different organizations and kind of helping them develop the skill sets and resources and ideas to be more innovative, to increase their innovation potential. That's kind of the way I phrase it. So, those are kind of my two worlds.
Okay, no, that's great. Now I'm going to put a pin in, you mentioned inventing,
Yes.
as far as that first part. So I'm going to put a pin in that one, come back to it. But you say half 50% of your work, that practitioner piece.
Yes.
And I can say, kind of diving through your history, take a quick look at your LinkedIn profile, even your link to your bios. Okay. Curious, how did you get to where you're at as far as this innovation practitioner? So if I look down the list, I see engineer at Chrysler, stand-up comedian, writer for BET. You were the marketing director for a video game company. You've been the marketing director for the New York Film Academy. Now You're this innovation practitioner. Yeah, we'll walk through some of those steps. What led to this? Yeah.
All of it was like serendipitous, accidents. So when I was 17. And a student at Michigan State University, I decided I wanted to do stand-up comedy. My mom always envisioned me going to work with a briefcase in a three-piece suit. So I kind of found engineering as that lane. I picked a degree that not necessarily passionate about, but very strategic in the sense that, it's a degree in packaging engineering. So everything you see comes in some sort of package. I liked physics, and that's pretty much the extent of science that went into it. It's like tensile strength and plastics and corrugated board and stuff like that. And all the time during school, I was doing stand-up. So I was winning stand-up competitions, traveling, and then my senior year, I really fell in love with the writing process. And so worked at Chrysler out of college, continued to do stand-up and writing. And I was like, like most of us, we have a thing that tugs on us over time. And you're like, all right, fine. So I had one friend who lived in LA. I went to go visit him and moved out there 3 months later. And so started on this journey of just exploring writing. And I worked as a production assistant on the Paramount lot. And then a few months after that, got my first writing job at BET. Now, what happens when you enter the entertainment industry, there's no longevity, right?
Mm-hmm.
You go from one project to another project. So in between projects, rather than starve, I would just take on other jobs, and that might be coaching a swim team. It might be, helping produce a music video, working at a fashion conference in Las Vegas. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was just picking up how to communicate with people, right? Like from storytelling, whether you're doing stand-up on a stage or you're writing a story, you're like capturing the essence of something and communicating it and trying to find a different way to, like every script is the same thing, right? It's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back, right? Any romantic comedy or the reluctant hero. Not me. Okay, I'll do it. And then you save the day. Like there's these certain constructs. All the stories are the same. They're just different elements that make them special. And then, at one point in time, I started working on smaller projects and was trying to help figure out how to market them. And marketing just kind of became what it is today, where there's like 10,003 different ways to sort of reach and engage people. And I really just saw like a thread of it's all sort of connected, right? From inception to delivery. there's this sort of storytelling aspect that people want to experience it, whether it's literally like sitting down and watching a television series, or we were just talking about Amazon Alexa, right? Like you can engage in storytelling in that capacity, or shopping, right? There's all sorts of different things. And so I think when it first all came together, I went to the American Film Institute, and we had a digital content lab there. So you got a conservatory, was put in by the government, and one of the best film schools in the world. And this clandestine operation above the library was this lab. There were 4 of us who ran the lab. I came in probably year 6 out of 10. And we were a think tank for marriages of technology and entertainment. And what happened was, since we were such a small team, we would recruit volunteer mentors from all over the world to help work on these projects. And I met some of the smartest people I would have, never come in contact with. And I just got this infatuation with that curiosity and creativity and ingenuity that goes into all these amazing things that people are developing. And so today, in many ways, I guess I'm just a big ball of mess that combines all those things.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, a big ball of mess. You mentioned misfit toys,
Yes.
right? As far as the oddball polymaths, I think was one reference in the book. I guess I'm curious. Really from 2 angles now with this. Obviously your journey, super fun, super. Yeah, I'm curious about that, right? I mean, lots of fun stops along the way. So if we look at going back to Dave Innovation yesterday, right, over 300 people, we knew we had folks coming at this from kind of innovation 101, right? They've been tapped on the shoulder. You're now the innovation person, or you have maybe other departments that don't necessarily have that in their day-to-day role.
Sure.
But you also have these experienced leaders that, innovation's been on their business card for 10 years. So I guess starting with let's go back to the person that's now tapped on the shoulder. Okay, innovation's your role now. I guess talk to some of those people. What do you tell the person that innovation's your thing now?
It's that's good luck. First and foremost, because a lot of times when organizations say, "Oh, we're going to have this person do," and it's almost like run away. I had a guy that I hired. I used to run the Ignition Factory for Omnicom Media Group, which is one of the largest media agencies in the world. He got an offer to go work for the World Economic Forum, and I was like, I see some holes in how it's structured. I was like, because he's a friend of mine too, so I was like, good luck, but just you sure you want to do this? And about a year later, he was like, you were right, because organizations have to be set up in a way that supports the innovation effort. A lot of times, it's like you're now the innovation person. And then it's this. It's my arms are folded, and I'm just waiting to see what you do, rather than support, be a champion for your efforts inside the company, and give you some free space to explore. As far as the job function itself, it's a lot of trust building. Because a lot of people don't, innovation, again, is just an empty word until it's applied in some way. So it's, how do you get those small wins? A great example and an amazing guest at your event yesterday, Molly Kane. She going into Homeland Security thinking going and thinking of the results, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do an Alexa skill that can detect. I'm making that up. She didn't say that idea, but this idea that, hey, you go in with these lofty goals. I'm basically going to change the world. And really, where she started to get her wins was, we need to redo a form. Right. Let's make the process of getting to the innovation easier, right? Let's move some stuff out of our way, or taking those teams out on just exploratory tours, and taking those stakeholders out on exploratory tours. Let's go see the robots or the holograms or the whatever the technology is, rather than me just kind of and now I've created stakeholders. I've created people who are passionate about the things they experience. A lot of times as innovators, we talk with our hands because the thing hasn't happened yet. It's and then it does this, and then it could do this if we made it do that, right? But if I just take you into a room and I can show you and you go, wow, the pitch is over. Yeah. Right. So, that's one of those things. And there's a really great book by a friend of mine named George Bratt, and the book is First Time Leader. And it talks about, how most in this case, C-suite executives fail within the first year of their role. He talks about why. And one of the principles he talks about is, as a first-time executive, you go in and you get a win. And the win doesn't have to be something like, some amazing thing. I interviewed the CEO of the 4As, which is the American Association of Advertising Agencies. And she was the first new CEO in a very long time. And I was like, I talked about this, what was the win you sought after? And she said, I got everybody MacBooks. Like it wasn't some big structural change. It was, a lot of people don't like PCs. So, and it just like, people felt better. And then you start to build that emotional relationship. Then you can start introducing more business tactics and things like that. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, a little bit, right? I mean, you're, exploratory trips, maybe some ideas for, how do you start introducing people to maybe some of the crazy concepts and obviously some of those easy wins. And even with Molly, her talk yesterday, kind of talking about what happened, you go for the moonshot, but you land on the roof. So right, kind of maybe aiming for the roof, at least initially.
Yeah. I'll add this to it. And I think there's that practical side. If innovation has not been in your title or a practice, it's really just developing this skill of curiosity. Like, go scour the land and look for, those undeveloped nuggets, right? Like find something that's on its way up, that's bubbling up. There's tons of resources, whether it's Startup Digest or Fast Company or Springwise, which is a great newsletter out of the UK. And you start to I think the one difference between somebody who has the role of innovation versus, because sometimes we're like, well, I do innovation, right? Like you get that sort of real estate debacle. That person who's assigned to do it actually has a little bit more freedom to explore, right? If you're the marketing person, you're really focused on marketing, which is fine. If I'm focused on innovation, that we can definitely work hand in hand, but I just have a little bit more, time in my day to go and search and seek things out and see how they might apply to the business.
Okay. Yeah, and that's great. So you talk about these, the skills, or you mentioned, right, a lot of these human skills are transferable. And I can tell you one thing that we're very passionate about, Centric. And in addition to the conference, we do workshops throughout the year. And we always say, right, we're kind of leaning into the 21st century skills, right? We're the developing the softer skills, and that's backed up. If you look at from PCW to the World Economic Forum, right? I mean, more and more of these executive level, CEO level surveys. What are the skills people are looking for? Right. A, and then B, what are the skills they're lacking? You're finding creativity, problem solving, critical thinking. These are all rising up just as fast and as high as programming development, right? Sure. Some of these technical skills. So, it's great to hear that, and I guess that transferability of these skills. I mean, what would you say? For people thinking, okay, I don't know how to be curious, or I've forgotten how to be curious. Like, I'm not creative. Don't look at me to be creative. What do you say to that mindset?
It was funny. I had a conversation with somebody on the show floor yesterday about that very thing. Somebody's going from the nonprofit world and wants to go into marketing, and came to the day of innovation to just sort of get some inspiration. We had a pretty lengthy conversation on that, and it is just like you'll find that are things in your DNA or your life experience or your personal experience that really do have applicability. Now, you did transferability now, so we're even. But, like for a very long time, I didn't think comedy had, I thought I had to live in two worlds, right? If I was doing stand-up, I couldn't be business-y. And if I was in a business room, I couldn't be funny, right? And then later, kind of like, oh, most of my creativity comes from puns. If I'm in a brainstorm, I'm either going to say something that rhymes or something really stupid or ridiculous, and then try to reverse engineer it back. And it's not like a deliberate thing. I'm just a silly person. So it's like, who are you, right? And I find that in a lot of the people I've interviewed is like eventually you tap into something that's not on a resume. And it's Miguel McKelvey, for instance, the CEO of WeWork. Miguel kind of grew up in community style living. His mom and her two best friends, were all single parents, and They had probably 4 or 5 kids amongst them, and so they would share resources, rides to school, lunches, like just kind of like this ecosystem of helping one another in community. And of course, like we work at the time I interviewed Miguel, they were valued at $160,000 per member. So, and now SoftBank is becoming a majority owner, and that. So you start to see and of course there's tons of other co-working spaces, but there's a reason that there's a part of his own, just lifeblood is in the ethos of the company. And so I think we all have to find that sort of trait that makes us, because it's basically like you're walking into an environment and saying, hey, I'm supposed to be here. And you're like, what? Well, what? And you're like, well, this is what I did, and this is what I care about. This is what I'm passionate about. It's just finding those things that connect the dots from one role or to another.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and asked you kind of, innovation to me is, and personally, innovation is in a big way, right? Connecting the dots.
Yeah.
And right, if you want to connect more dots, you got to put more dots on the canvas.
That's true.
And so you've already mentioned a few people you ran into yesterday, and obviously I know we've had really runs the gamut as far as just the cross sector of industries, and the people that were together at our event, and as far as faucet manufacturers, folks that are working with NASA.
At first I thought it was Farrah Fawcett, and I was very excited.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, it's Delta.
Yeah, different faucet. But anyway, lots of manufacturers, nonprofits, government, right? All these folks crashing together. So really kind of an agnostic, group of people.
Right.
I guess what is we'll hear, throughout the year, right? Okay, maybe that's not the event or the group for me. And obviously we're not alone, right? There's lots of great groups out there that do this, bringing different people together. But I guess when you do have, going back to the leader crossing their arms, right? Kind of frowning on the exploration piece. What do you say to some of the companies or maybe individuals that, that's not me, right? That's not relevant to my industry. Why would I go to that event or invest my time?
I talk about this concept in my book of, how not know. And right, you guys also had a lot of presence from Second City at the event. And Second City does a lot of corporate training under this guise of yes and. So that rule in comedy is there's no wrong decision that gets made. You just add to it, right? So you say one thing, I go, yes, and also it's hot outside, yes, and I forgot my umbrella deliberately. Like you kind of just keep building on it. You never say my character wouldn't do that, right? You don't pull out of those scenarios. And I think there's a methodology within business that just says how not know. Like, how can we make this work? Let's explore it first before we just say no to it. And I mean, I think some of the best surprises, I talk about this idea of, you talk about connecting the dots. I also talk about unlikely pairings. And so you'll find one of my favorite ones that came up recently that I had nothing to do with, but I was like, Ancestry.com and Spotify have a partnership, right? And so now,
right.
It's sort of prescriptive music based on your historical origins, right? And, it could be kitschy, it could actually work, but you'll start to see these partnerships that you're like, oh, that's actually a really good idea, or you'll see things changing where in real estate, for instance, apartment buildings are going up and they don't have parking spaces. And so what they're offering is you get credits for Uber as part of your rent. So, it's real estate and Uber, real estate development and ride sharing. They're not a readily likely partnership. For a while, I worked on this for a long time. We didn't make it happen, but when Hilton was a client of mine, we worked on a partnership between Hilton and Airbnb. And it was what? It was that initial response, it was hear me out. But what better, if I'm a loyalty customer with Hilton, if I go and stay at a Hilton and you guys help me rent my place out and I make money on my stay and pay you your full rate and I net out at $20 a night, win-win, right?
Absolutely.
And so I think you have to just be willing to at least explore it to a degree.
Okay.
And it's not, that doesn't take any skin off it. Like I'm not even saying you have to put money into it. Just put some thought and energy into it, and just to say how, like just for the fun of it, you know. And I think you'd be surprised at what comes out of those, you know, those explorations.
Okay, so I mean, really, just being open to it, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
no, that's fantastic. I guess with you know, staying with curiosity here and, you know, creativity, and this all comes together, right? If you ask 100 people to define innovation, creativity, all these words are going to just intermingle and keep coming up. But yeah, I think that there has been a lot over the last decade, you know, around the word creativity, and you know, even a lot of science will back up, you know, kind of the trainability of you know, creativity and how we can learn that. I'm curious about curiosity. Is curiosity a muscle in your mind? And if so, how do you know, strengthen or, you know, train that muscle?
You kind of hit the nail on the head. It's like, I shouldn't be at that conference, right? Or I shouldn't go to this thing. Or I don't need to talk to these people. And, you know, I talked about this yesterday during my talk, and, you know, it's finding the fascination in something. I couldn't remember the phrase yesterday when I was on stage. I was like, I just wrote it today, and now it just comes out. But finding the fascination, you talk to somebody. I'll go back to Molly for a second. You know, when she rides the Amtrak, she said she was in a conversation with some teacher, and like sit next to each other for whatever, an hour, 2 hours. And eventually, it's like she finds out there's a high suicide rate amongst teachers, and just like but because she was interested, right. You know, a wise person once said, "If you want to be interesting, be interested." Right. So it's finding that point that makes you tick. But it just comes from asking questions, you know, and that's just a person-to-person connection. I think the broader curiosity is, what are they doing over there, right? And seeing how other ecosystems operate. I'll 1,000% borrow from other industries. I may take something from the art world that applies to, you know, the technology world, or take something from tech that applies to teaching. And I've been in this, you know, business of just understanding the mechanics of reinvention. And you know, you'll see that something that applies in one industry, the principles of it will apply to something else. But if you don't go and explore that, one of my favorite examples, I was at Cannes Lions earlier this year, and there's a group there called LDH, which is almost like, there's a guy named Verbal who's pretty much the Kanye West of Japan, minus the Make America Great Again hat. And make Japan great again. But he, you know, him and like their whole like record label and movement, they have this whole spiral model that they call it. And it's like, and they have a diagram, and it's like these upward spirals. And it's basically how they iterate with their artists and the people that are part of their label. And not only that, it's like the concentric spirals. So it's like, we'll test something, grow it, then we'll collaborate with another artist or entity, and then we'll just keep building. And it's not a model we really talk about here in the States. And so had I not gone to that session, I'm not a dancer. I don't produce music. I was curious to just understand it. And so I think there's a lot of value in just being in the room sometimes and absorbing information.
Okay, no, that's great, and even through that is you know, I heard reinvention, and you know, even coming back around, right?
Yeah.
Okay, how do we kind of maybe revisit you know, previous ideas and use those? And now going back to the beginning, I stuck a pin up here, right? So you talked about invention,
yes,
initially, and some of the folks you're working with and talking to, and yeah, I've heard it said. You know, invention, you know, mathematicians and scientists in labs invent things. The rest of us innovate, right? So a lot of it is, you know, connecting old ideas in new ways, or, you know, so it's more that reinventing of things. I guess with that, you know, what is, you know, looking at kind of the reinvention or invention? I mean, where does, you know, this fall?
Here's the thing. I don't know if, I feel like the word invention is strong. And I say this because I feel like we are just continuing to iterate and combine things and put them together. I can't put my finger on like a brand new discovery. Like you take Uber, it was just saying like, can everybody be a taxi? Right, like, and then let's build the technology that will make us help us be able to do that. The core of the concept is nothing new. How it was accomplished was something like, that really revolutionized. It was the birthing of the sharing economy, right? Whatever I have is now monetizable. So my home, my bicycle, my parking spaces, anything I have is like, oh, I can build a living off of this. And so that's, I think reinvention is a stronger word. And you're right, absolutely, with the science discoveries and things like that. Shout out to Hakeem Oluseyi, a guest on my show, who was the chief science officer for the Discovery Channel. And I asked that very question. I was like, all this science things, like, there's kids starving on the street. It's like, why are we dumping millions upon billions of dollars? And he said, you know what, he said there was a discovery in the 1920s and it just sat dormant for decades. And it's like, look at this thing. Forgive me for not knowing all the science behind it. Right. But he said, some 40, 50 years later, it's the one central thing that makes our cell phones work. So, there's something to be said about experimentation for the sake of experimentation, just to see like, okay, what's out there? And you see I love looking at these cycles of technology that kind of like enter the culture, where at first it's just like, oh, look what we can do. And then it's like, you're just doing it for the sake of it. Think about Facebook, right? It was started off as a hot or not kind of website. Right, yeah. Now it's like the most centrally, connected thing for friends and families around the world. And so you go through these cycles, and then it becomes a little bit more serious and has purpose and meaning, and then you start to iterate on that purpose and meaning. Yeah. But the spirit of invention just means like saying, "What if?" How can we do this? I love asking impossible questions. Like, is there a way to transport people from one part of the world to another? And, and there's a company, I'm forgetting the name of it, but they have like these golden containers. And lo and behold, it's like they can put a container in Switzerland and one in Los Angeles. And in real time, you can walk into this container and not be physically transported, but I can have a conversation with you. And it's like this cultural exchange. So there's, the thinking and just even the inspiration from like the entertainment industry, science fiction or whatever. Does art imitate science or vice versa, or art imitate life? So it's that to me, that's the most fun part of it, is like getting in there and brainstorming and just saying, what if, or can we, or how can we? Yeah. Yeah,
no, that's great. And maybe transferring ourselves across the world is easier than solving the political divide. I think, going exactly. With conversations from yesterday. No, that's great. Really good stuff. And I guess also knowing some of our audience, right, as far as some of let's get a little more tactical, if you will. Looking at, invention, reinvention. We talked about, moon shots and landing on the roof instead. So, there's also a lot of conversation. You see, the radical versus incremental innovation. And, where do you invest? If you're fortunate enough to have that innovation or at least R&D budget, right? Okay, where are you? How do you kind of balance that out of, we really want to go after new may not be invention, but right, new product line, new widget, whatever, versus, let's really hone in on just improvement.
Well, that's where, in my experience, it's where you actually, the innovation process gets a little unsexy, right? Because it's saying whether you have a pyramid structure or a manifesto or something that guides your approach to innovation. GE, for instance, has like a really amazing manifesto. I spent some time writing a manifesto for a really large bank. Or you'll find a company like, let's say a McDonald's, for instance, has this triangle thing where, 2% of our resources are saved for that exploration into the unknown. 10% is for iteration. This 40% is like for the known things that we know how to do. And then all those pieces kind of talk to each other. I gave an example yesterday of a project we did for CW, and is a series called iZombie. And I took a wearable device that does like these amazing brain scans. It's actually, but it's designed for meditation. So it's basically a connected sweatband, and it gives us a really dope readout of what your brain activity is like. And not like, do I have a tumor? But it's more like, what part of your brain is most active? Are you in problem solving mode? Are you relaxed? Are you, whatever that state of being is. and we partnered them with the zombie series, right? And so we turned those brain activities into flavor profiles.
Right.
And then we did this 3D printed pieces of candy that matched up with the flavor profile. So when you got your brain scanned, it may show up yellow, mine might show up purple. And I would give you this 3D printed piece of candy, and you could essentially eat your own brain.
Nice.
There's a couple of points there. One, it was fun and kitschy for the people who got to do it. We did it at South by Southwest. Two, everybody who did it got a shareable card that they could then share on their social media. So the social media is the part we know, right? Like, oh, people will share, like, look at my brain activity, right? Like, and then a little bit of information about this, almost like a horoscope at that point in time. And then the bigger the discovery was, what can we really do with wearable technology, right? Every brand makes some form of emotional promise. Pick a slogan, I don't know, Snickers really satisfies. Like, are you really satisfied after you eat a Snickers? Like, now we actually have, I don't have to fill out a punch card or like even like do some qualitative thing on a tablet. Right. I have your physiology that I can use as measurement. And so, it was sort of this hidden experiment. And I think you can structure projects or initiatives in that same way, where you have a little bit of what if, you have a little bit of like, all right, we're familiar with this, and then we're very safe here. And so, like, having those things work together and at points in time can be really valuable.
Okay, and I guess even with the zombie, the brain candy example, right? Okay, so if that wouldn't necessarily hit the mark, there's at least a lot of residue that said, look, this can filter down into.
Exactly.
We're learning things regardless of what the critics at South by Southwest that year said about our pop up.
Yeah. So it's absolutely, you're absolutely right. It's I'll call it just building a safety net, right? Do the shiny thing, the shiny experimental thing, but just back it up with something that is safer. So yeah.
Okay. No, that's good. I think that was, kind of wrapping up, so some of the lessons from your talk and getting to meet you over the last couple of days and certainly some highlights from the book, to finish up on this curiosity. Let's, I'm curious, give us some of your wish list or, best examples, curiosity shopping list, if you will. So I guess what books should we be reading right now?
I'd say I read a lot of philosophical books because I think you talked about this earlier. There's this whole emotionally intelligence side to this process. When Molly talks about doing a moonshot and landing on the roof, that's a deflating feeling, right? Like, and I'm a big believer in the anti-case study. I've done talks for for instance, at a VR conference. Showed an example of a VR project and we had done, which was cool. And then I showed them 10 other ideas that never happened, and I told them why they didn't happen. And there is a darker side to the innovation process. It's lonely, like when you see the world or you see opportunities a certain way and nobody else it doesn't register with them, and you keep trying to find different. I refer to that as being like relentlessly optimistic. Is like I need to find a different way of communicating it, different way of presenting it. Whether you're an entrepreneur and you founded a company, and sorry, I'm going to meander for a second.
Oh, you're fine.
But I found, and this is kind of a free idea for anybody who's listening or watching. I found like a bunch of decks from companies when they first started, like Airbnb's first pitch deck, or all these different companies, and you see where they started and how they presented the information, and sometimes you're like, that was what you put out in front of people, right? Or it was called what? And you start to see like where people began and the hurdles or humps or bumps along the way that got them to where they are now. So when I talk about, when you ask me what books I read, it's like Eckhart Tolle, it's Marianne Williamson. Okay. It's these things that kind of keep you emotionally sound, because you're going to get told no, you're going to get beat up. That idea is going to almost happen, and at the 11th hour is going to be like, nah, no thanks. I saw an email this morning on the thing I'm working on. I'm like, oh, come on. We've been working on this for like 3 months now. Like, why does it keep getting pushed back? And now we're up to the project requires like a 30-day window, and now we're like at day 28. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, you just say yes. It's a no-brainer. Because you do become emotionally attached to the process, and when you build the cliche is it's like your baby, and it does like feel that way, and just like I think also when we talk innovation, perception-wise, we think about stuff like VR or artificial intelligence or technology, and I'm a big fan of. I just want to know what people are doing. Like what are people thinking? So I listen a lot to like the Moth Radio Hour. It's like these everyday storytellers. It's like this is what happened with me and a teacher. And that starts off bad, doesn't it? No, but this is what happened. That one time I saw my best friend on a boat, like randomly that I hadn't seen in 30 years. And these true stories, and they're like just amazing moments in people's lives. And I think, for me, that keeps me, like, my innovation grounded in some form of current reality and like emotional need for people.
Right.
So it's like, all right. And then you start to look at those sorts of other technologies, like holograms, for instance. We've seen the Tupac hologram and we've heard about all this stuff, but then you go like, if you look at the numbers, the biggest spike in holography is actually in the medical industry. Right. Helping people visualize organs. Very similarly with VR, it's not entertainment, it's empathy. It's being used to treat PTSD or overcome phobias. And, we forget that real people have real problems and there's ways to apply what we're thinking to that. Whether it's from an entertainment, like a zombie, let's introduce you to this meditation device through an entertainment, form. Now you've just, both companies have won in that, ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's great. And that was not a hologram, by the way. That Tupac is alive. That was a live cast from a secret hidden village in Middle Mexico somewhere.
Somebody posted a picture on Twitter. It was like Tupac with Beyonce. Like it was like, wait a second.
Yeah, probably not. No, that's great. As you're saying this, I mean, getting back to a lot of this conversation we've been having, you're talking about the curiosity, the fact that this is just curious people like yourself that are whether through serendipity or just being forced into roles, all this cool stuff. It's curious humans like you and I, right?
Yeah.
That at the end of the day, there's no big fancy wizard behind the screen.
No, humans are problem solvers. This is why you mentioned the video gaming industry, and when I worked at Machinima, like really just understanding that, why that really takes off. At its core is like all video games is hyperactive problem solving. Right. So, and like we love solving problems. There's a high you get from like, aha, got it. Right. And not only the aha, got it, I did it. Right. Like I got the idea. Now I've executed it. So that feels good, whether it's a way you're trying to figure out how to finally communicate a thing to your kid. You've tried 8 different ways of explaining like 7 times 14. No, you have to carry come on. And you're like, now the 1 goes around. Right. So like, it's that I solved a problem. And that's really all it is, and, I found a creative, Thomas Edison, this quote has come up like so many times over the past week, which is weird, but I didn't fail 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 ways to not make a light bulb. So it's just like, that's a problem he wanted to solve. How can we provide light that doesn't require fire? I think that's what I think that's what was on this brief.
Right. Yeah, so that's great. So I guess that theme there, right? I mean, if innovation is problem solving and it's being curious to solve those problems, and really anyone can come in and with an open mind step into a role and solve whatever problems they're curious about, or maybe they have to.
Well, just like I think just the mechanics of solving a problem is innately tied to curiosity, because you're automatically put in a position where you have to go seek an answer, and that is a form of curiosity. Now, where you go, how far and wide you go is that's expandable or contractible amounts of curiosity.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
It did not kill the cat.
Very good. No, the cat's still alive. And he has.
I'm allergic to cats.
He's got 8 more lives anyway. So, well, thank you so much, Chris. No, great conversation.
Thank you.
I guess we'll just wrap this up again, kind of pointing back to Innovation Crushers. So, where can we find more about the podcast?
You can go to www. It's 3 W's, just in case you guys didn't know that. A dot, which is You know the dot, right? It's period,
Yes.
like
Yeah, yeah.
lower on the, I think it's pinky. Thecrush.co.
Okay.
So everything's spelled correctly. Innovation Crush, you can Google that. I'm Densonology on most platforms. And I'm the black guy with the bald head.
Okay, fair enough. And then also the book. So we've got Crushing the Box, 10 Essential Rules for Breaking the Rules.
Yes.
And they can find more about that on thecrush.co, correct?
Yep.
And I'm sure Amazon, all your favorite booksellers,
Absolutely.
brick and mortar, if those are still in your neighborhood. So,
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
all right. Thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate it.